thought I could hold it together, but thank you, Doug. Thank you for the whole family who contributed to that. I think as for so many people, family always came first for Barbara. She adored our boys, and when they married, she embraced the new families. Each grandchild has a special place in her heart, as did each of her many relatives. Barbara and I shared so many great times together. You'll be hearing today, hard to read when water's in your eyes. Anyway, and you're going to hear a lot today about what Barbara meant to a lot of people. Today, I'm going to talk mostly about the things that Barbara did that made many lives better. Barbara was full of determination, grit, grace, compassion, so many things that make a person really great. Not many people have heard of Barbara Cohen, but she was great. Barbara and I first met on a blind date. I went to law school with her cousin Milo, and Milo and I had become friends. And this was kind of early in the second semester of law school. And during a particularly boring class, Milo leaned over to me and says, "Hey, would you like to go out with my cousin?" So I said, "I don't know what she looked like." So Milo drew a stick figure with curly hair, and I said, "Sure, why not?" When I got to see Barbara for the first time, I decided that stick figures were pretty good. On our first date, I went with Milo and his then fiancée Jane up to Brighton, Mass, outside of Boston, where Barbara was living in her final year at Boston University. By the way, Milo and Jane, they couldn't be here today. They've moved to Florida, and they had trouble making it here today, but I think they're here by FaceTime thanks to the modern wonders of technology. So hi, Milo and Jane. It's your doing that we're all here today. Milo said to me that if we got through the first day, we'd get married. And it turned out he was a prophet, because the first day of our date was pretty bumpy, as it happened. And Barbara liked to say that she got drunk on 4 drinks the night of her first date. The truth was, Barbara wasn't much of a drinker. She got drunk on 1 drink and spilled the other 3 drinks, which is true. Anyway, a bunch of things happened that were kind of unusual with her family, who I knew none of them at the time, and I'll spare you the details, but kind of the strange thing that happened that morning drew us together, and by the end of the second day, we knew we had something going, and there were very few weekends between then and 18 months later when we got married that we weren't together, and we spoke every day. I know that people say that someone can be beautiful inside and out, and it's kind of trite, but Barbara was beautiful inside and out. I'm going to talk mostly about the inside, but first a story about the outside. There was an actress who was pretty popular when I met Barbara named Ali MacGraw, and people thought Barbara looked a lot like Alan McGraw. In fact, when people say someone always says someone looks like somebody, people always said Barbara looked like Alan McGraw. And one thing I never forgot was, Barbara and I got married just before my last year of law school, and during that year, there was a reception held for the students. And we were allowed to take dates, and of course, Barbara was my date. So the day after the reception, I was in the school cafeteria, and some student I barely knew came up to me and said, "Wow, that woman you were with last night, she looked a lot like Alan McGraw." And I think what I said to him kind of flustered him, because I said, "Well, that woman I was with was my wife." He said, "Well, I never liked Alan McGraw." Anyway, he was lying. But it's Barbara's beautiful inside that made Barbara so loved, and what I miss so much, and that drew people to her. She had boundless energy and jumped feet first into whatever she chose to do. She loved teaching, and the few times I got to observe her, she truly lit up the room. She was creative, she was inventive, she was really into it. In 1995, she was named the Granby Teacher of the Year, was a semifinalist for State Teacher of the Year. Whoever won walked on water, I'm sure, because I don't know who could have been better than Barbara. But anyway, it was a great honor for her. In fact, two of her former students are here today. One, I won't say which one, she taught in her very first class. And it's amazing she's 40 years old today. And the other student she taught in Granby, where she taught the longest. And I know she had an impact on both of their lives. And I'm thrilled that they could be here today. There are also a lot of people who wanted to be here today specifically because the impact she made on our lives as a teacher, a parent figure, or other selfless roles. As I said, she was full speed ahead, involved in a personal, intimate way, often overcoming obstacles that might have deterred others, just to make sure she had done her best to help. Barbara was an idealist through and through, and actually had difficulty at times when someone or something didn't match her ideals. The background of the people whom she was drawn to help was never a consideration. She literally had friends around the world, including in Japan, where she had gone on a fellowship. The friends she made in Japan, who actually she met in Long Meadow, Mass, I think, when she was on a sabbatical year teaching in Long Meadow, Mass. She reunited with her when she was in Japan, and she wrote a lovely note in Barbara's legacy.com page when she learned that Barbara had passed away. She has a former student of hers who lives in Thailand now, whose family had escaped the Khmer Rouge and were settled in Granby, Connecticut for a time. There was church sponsorship, and she had a major influence on his life. And we've had a chance to see him now and then when he lived in California, and now he's back living an entrepreneurial life in Thailand. And finally, there was a young couple who lived in our building from Saudi Arabia. And they came to view Barbara as a mother figure. They were young enough to almost be our grandchildren. And they were distraught when they learned that Barbara passed away. Did a FaceTime with me from Saudi Arabia. So she truly had friends around the world. Okay, now one of the first things that Barbara did that kind of demonstrated what her life's mission was going to be occurred when our kids were little, when we lived in Rocky Hill, our first stop along the way. It was Easter, and Barbara did naturally what every Jewish mother in the history of the world has done on Easter, which is a major Jewish holiday, as everyone knows. Barbara dressed her three little boys as bunny rabbits and took them to the local nursing home to cheer up people who couldn't be home with their families. That was Barbara. Our next stop along the way was in South Windsor, where our boys grew up. And by the time this next chapter of our lives began, our boys were no longer little bunny rabbits. They were either in college or out of college already. Barbara and I had kicked around a little bit the idea of maybe being foster parents. And I really wasn't keen on the idea particularly. Now, anyone who's ever had a colonoscopy knows that when you have a colonoscopy, you can't drive yourself home because you are basically under the influence of the anesthesia. So Barbara drives me home. When we get home, and Barbara said to me when we got home, "Thanks for agreeing to be a foster parent." I didn't remember the ride home. I sure didn't remember agreeing to be it. But as a lawyer, I always follow the rule that we learned: first zero false, first day. If Barbara Cohen says I agreed, I had agreed regardless of where my mind was at the time. It turned out pretty well, and there were a few young people in the world who were glad that Barbara took such unethical advantage of me. And beyond the foster care, there were many other young people who she took under her wing, and some of whom stayed with us for short periods of time. She really had an impact. Ultimately, Unfortunately, when we moved to Hamden, we were still doing foster care, but we spent a great deal of time at Barbara's instigation, volunteering at Ronald McDonald House. And when we finally moved to West Haven, her home territory, we volunteered at the Fisher House, which is the Veterans Administration version of McDonald House. And then Barbara got into helping families who had been displaced through war in Iraq and Afghanistan and moved to the United States through a group called IRIS, that's out of New Haven. And she's had a major impact on helping those people become acclimated to life in the United States. So Barbara really was enthusiastic and committed at a very deep personal level to improving people's lives. Now, aside from her good works, as my brother-in-law Don said, she was a feminist from the word go. She was committed to making her boys become nurturers, and she succeeded. They're all great fathers, I'm proud to say. Now, there's one story about her feminism that involved me to some extent. It was our very first trip to Europe, and we were in England, and Barbara looked up a restaurant that she said looked like a good place to go, and we had to take the underground or the tube, whatever they call it there, and wandered around. We found the restaurant, and we walked in to the restaurant, and first of all, I think we were the only ones not from the House of Lords in that restaurant. Very hoi polloi, obviously. And we sat down at the table, and the tuxedo server came over with two menus. One was a his menu, and the other was a hers menu, if you know what that is. The hers menu has no prices on it. Well, that was too much for my feminists. Barbara made a big display of grabbing my menu and giving me hers. They couldn't wait to get us out of that. But anyway, that was Barbara. Barbara was naturally much more adventurous than I was, and she got the travel bug and she kind of passed it on to me, and I overcame my own dislike of flying, and we really saw a lot of the United States and a lot of the world together. We often traveled with our good friends Cindy and John, who are here today, and with our friend Dale and her husband Brian, who passed away and was a very dear friend of mine. And sometimes we traveled with family, and we often went to visit family. So we were on the go quite a bit. I was really lucky that she pushed me, because she got me off the couch and into the world. It was good for me. Shakespeare once wrote a famous line that said, and it was in the play Julius Caesar, "The evil that men do live after them, the good is often interred with their bones." Well, he had never met Barbara. There was no evil in Barbara at all, and the incountable good she did is a continuing legacy. Barbara left an indelible footprint on my heart and wherever she chose to make a commitment. One thing I want to say something about that what Barbara went through, and I'm not going to dwell on this because she wouldn't want me to. From the time her disease was discovered in about June of 2019 until the day it claimed her, she refused to call herself brave, but she was brave. And she was also determined. There were things that she wanted to do, and she often felt really not very well when we did these things. She was insisted that we make the wedding of our wonderful niece, Rebecca, in Tennessee. We flew to Tennessee while Barbara was in the midst of her first chemo treatment. And she had a good time. We made it to my granddaughter Emery's bat mitzvah in the midst of COVID. We got there, one of the few people who were allowed in person, and we got there. Barbara was determined to visit my son Doug and his family in Los Angeles. And we got on a plane, and we went there. She didn't feel very well. Before she kind of entered the last phase, we actually went with our friend Cindy and John to 2 Airbnbs, one in the Berkshires and one in Cape Cod. We went there because Barbara was determined that she was going to continue to live as best she could. She had a very rare form of cancer, and she lived much longer than anyone thought she could. And the last several months were really rough. The one thing I can say, though, is that there were 4 things that Barbara really wanted, and she got all 4 of them. One was she didn't want to have great pain, and thanks to the help of hospice, which was ever present in our home, they did. They managed her pain, so she really didn't have great pain. She also wanted to be at home the whole time and ate her bed, and she was. She also wanted it to be bright and not dark, and it was. And she didn't want to be alone. And I and our good friend Cindy were holding her hands when she took her last breath. It was hard, but it's all we could do for her at the time. We miss you, Barbara. May your memory be a blessing. Thank you.